Webiters, it is time for a very exciting meeting. We have the honor to welcome on stage the founder of one of the biggest cybersecurity companies in the world and former chairman of Nokia, who is currently chairing WithSecure Corporation, Risto Siilasmaa, in a fireside chat about cyber resilience for a secure digital era. Moderated by Leisha Santorelli of BBC.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So we have Risto Siilasmaa, excuse my terrible pronunciation of your last name, a self-declared paranoid optimist, but also very famous for having been Finland's first billionaire and for having been the man behind one of the most successful turnarounds and transformations in corporate history. I'm talking, of course, about Nokia, where he was chairman from 2012 to 2020, and he is the founder of F-Secure and WithSecure Corporations, and also chairman of the WithSecure Corporation. So today we're going to be talking about cyber resilience for a secure digital era, and we're going to get straight into it by talking about one of the most pressing issues that we're facing at the moment, which is the war in Ukraine and what that threat landscape presents. So, in terms of war these days, the battlefield is no longer just in the physical realm. We are seeing actually first shots being fired, not on the 24th of February when troops and tanks rolled across the border, but actually in the cyber domain. A report released by Microsoft this past week said that a cyber weapon called Foxblade was used. So could you elaborate a little bit more in terms of what this new threat, this new modern warfare entails as it pertains to the war in Ukraine and the consequences of that?
Yeah, that's a very, very broad topic, but let's start from the fact that we don't really understand the seriousness of cyber attacks against our society. If we have a conflict at the border, some shots are fired, maybe a border guard is killed, that's really a major international incident, and the army will be on alert, and the state of warfare is close to being declared. And that's like one person wounded or killed somewhere far away. But when a nation state attacks our core institutions, trying to make all citizens lose faith in the judiciary, in our democratic organs, the parliaments, the elections, the way the society works, what do? We do nothing. We just keep watching as they attack the core of our society through social media, through fake news, through all sorts of means. And this is a serious attack. They are attacking the core of who we are. So what happened in Ukraine, and by the way, I don't like to talk about war in Ukraine. I think we should be talking about Russia's invasion. Because when we talk about war in Ukraine, we only say Ukraine, we don't say Russia. And we sort of lose sight of who's behind this. So we should be talking about Russia's invasion. And what happened there is we have seen how practice makes perfect. The Ukrainians have been under constant attack for the last 8 years in cyber. And they have learned a lot. Cyber defense, it's a muscle. And the only way you become muscular is by exercising. And they have been exercising for 8 years. So when many people have wondered why nothing more serious has happened in Ukraine through Russia's cyber attacks, the reason is that Ukrainians have become pretty good in defending themselves.
Is that partly because, in terms of the attacks that we've seen in previous years, 2017, 2018, and so forth, on infrastructure, for example, the electricity grid, that was reported, but since then there hasn't been a continued focus in terms of what these cyber attacks, what form they take. There might be a lack of attention around it and therefore kind of a lack of awareness in terms of the frequency, in terms of the severity. Is this something you think ought to be discussed a lot more, ought to be interrogated a lot more so people are more aware that they need to build this so-called muscle?
Well, constant practice is of course the key ingredient of being able to defend your core infrastructure. And there's nothing that replaces a real enemy. If we fight with fake bullets, everybody knows that the bullets are fake and it doesn't feel serious. So really investing in proper practice, doing it by surprise, not letting people know in advance, doing red teaming, purple teaming, all of that is very, very important. But in Ukraine, Russia has been attacking the critical infrastructure all the time, including the energy sector. And they have managed to make some damage, but nothing that would be dramatic. Maybe the biggest visible thing was when the war started and the border was clogged with people who couldn't get out of Ukraine to Poland. And people were wondering why they were being stopped at the border. The women and children waiting for hours and hours. It was because of Russia's cyber attack against the border control IT systems. So they couldn't check anybody's passports. So this is probably the most visible, successful attack by Russia during the Ukrainian war.
And quickly, do you think that some of the strength that Ukraine has demonstrated against Russian attacks has been helped by the Ukrainian president's call to hackers all around the world to help assist them in defending the country against Russian tactics?
Yeah, there are many reasons why they have been so successful in defending. One is that many large Western companies have really supported them very well. You mentioned Microsoft already. They have done a tremendous job in Ukraine. Google as well, and many others. In my companies have pitched in to defend Ukraine, not just by our employees volunteering, but also the company has done what it has been able to do. Also, Ukraine has sort of the other side of the coin. Part of the international cybercrime has originated from Ukraine. Actually, all the former Soviet Union member states have been fairly active in conducting cybercrime. So they have a lot of talent that is now all focused on either attacking Russia or defending Ukraine. So there are many parties. There's the states, Russia, Ukraine, state-related organizations. There's the activists in both countries, and then there's the international community that the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine called to attack targets that they gave on social media in Russia.
Let's talk about the international community, because we are seeing something called Ukraine fatigue set in within the so-called news cycle. Why should people continue to pay attention? Can you just elaborate what some of the implications or consequences are for the rest of the world? Because you mentioned cyber attacks, again, it's not just one hacker attacking a system. It encompasses network penetration, it encompasses espionage, it encompasses cyber influence operations, all very different areas. So can you elaborate a little bit more for our audience as to why they should continue to pay attention?
Well, cyber is a small part of the reason. The big reason why the fatigue is so dangerous is that Ukraine is truly fighting for all of us. I think all of us in Eastern Europe, we understand that. The Finns understand that we have a 1,300-kilometer border with Russia. The Baltic states, they understand that. You understand that. But the rest of the world just gets tired of hearing about Ukraine again. But we know that the Russian mentality and the mentality of the Putin administration, and we know that if they feel they have been allowed to do something, they will continue to try the same thing again somewhere else. And we just need to stay adamant. We need to continue supporting Ukraine and make sure that Russia is not successful because of what we and what our children need, not just because of what is happening in Ukraine.
And briefly, do you have some ideas around how we can continue to counter these cyber threats being posed by Russia?
Well, I don't think that's the most difficult thing related to the war in Ukraine or Russia's invasion. I think the traditional warfare is now the most important thing. The beauty, if you want to take that perspective, of cyber weapons is that they are very cheap, they are very effective, and they are deniable. But there's no need to be deniable anymore in Ukraine. So traditional weapon systems work very well. But when you need to conduct your operations in such a way that you can deny them, there's nothing better than cyber attacks. And they're also cheap and they are effective. So it's a pretty good weapon.
Well, let's move from one war to another in a bit of a different form, this time in trade and technology. We're talking, of course, about the technological race between US and China. Who do you think is winning that technological, some call it a Cold War actually, and where does Europe fit in here?
Well, Europe is pretty much a no-show, unfortunately. If you'll bear with me, some statistics that I find very interesting. Europe is a superpower in university research. We still do about 30% of world's university research. And if you think of any business that would grow based on the innovations and inventions done by university researchers, the tech business is probably the first that comes into mind. And if we pick the 8 sub-segments of technology, and we pick the 5 largest companies in each from those 8 sub-segments, we get a list of 40 companies. And logically, at least 1/3 of them should be European because of the process starting from the university research and then getting to scalable businesses. What would you guess how many of those 40 are actually European?
I have no idea. Enlighten me.
Well, there are only 4. And one of those is Accenture, which is not really a European company. It's just domiciled in Ireland for well-known tax-related reasons. So there are actually only SAP, Nokia, and Ericsson that are on that list. And more interestingly, if you look at the 21 American companies and the 10 Chinese companies that are on that list, the American companies have an average age of about 40 years. The 10 Chinese companies have an average age of about 25 years. And the 4 European companies have an average age of over 100 years. And the youngest one is SAP, which was founded in 1972, so over 50 years ago. So during the last 50 years, Europe has not been able to add a single company into that list of the 50 largest companies in tech by revenue, while the average age of the Chinese companies is about 25 years, so half of the youngest European company. So we are a no-show.
What can be done to reverse that, to change that?
Well, I think the key reason why we are a no-show, of course there are many reasons, but the biggest one is that we don't have a large home market to offer to our tech startups, whereas China and the US have a very large home market. But there are other reasons. Historically, we didn't have funding for tech startups. Now we do. In some areas of Europe, we are completely on par with Silicon Valley or Shanghai or Shenzhen. So that's no longer a reason.
Only some places, though. I'm guessing Finland is one of them.
Yeah, the new Nordics, we have an equal number of unicorns nowadays with Silicon Valley per capita. So really a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem in Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. Other areas such as Southern Europe is still unfortunately pretty far away, although there are some hotspots emerging there as well.
So a little bit of a north-south divide. But how about Central and Eastern Europe? Could we see more progress there?
Yeah, I think we are witnessing some progress right now. We have Webit trying to transform the way companies are funded and how great startups from Europe mostly, get more visibility and attention. So hopefully it will help Bulgarian companies as well. Although when I looked at the list of the companies in the Founders Forum, the top companies seem to be not local companies, unfortunately, not yet.
I do want to get to venture capital and startups versus corporations in a bit, but just to come back to the race for tech supremacy, so the two big Goliaths battling it out, the US and China. In terms of the important high-tech, advanced technology spaces, be it the development of semiconductors or quantum computing, does it worry you that we're seeing a decline in the US? So according to a report by ITIF, we're seeing that from 4% in 1995, China now accounts for 21.5% in these critical areas, whereas we've seen a decline in the US. Should we be worried about that?
Well, I was really excited about China 10 years ago. I started studying Mandarin Chinese myself. When I visited China, which I did all the time, I gave all my public speeches in Chinese. I got to know most of the famous Chinese entrepreneurs. I met with the president of China probably 5-6 times. And I was really excited about the energetic feeling in China and how everything was possible. And now I'm not excited at all anymore due to the events over the last 3 years, or maybe last 5 years. And I think that will come back to haunt China as well. They are losing some of the entrepreneurial spirit as we speak.
So you're referring, of course, to the authoritarian regime and how they're tightening their grip on power, as well as human rights abuses in Xinjiang, as well as concerns around national security and surveillance technology involving companies like Huawei. But let's talk a little bit about how you were excited, because the Nordic nations 5 years ago wanted to be a lot closer. There were memorandums of understanding. There was a lot of these kind of bilateral goodwill type of exchanges. Is it really in Europe's interest to decouple from China?
Well, I don't think Europe should decouple from China. Our historical challenge with China has been that the playing field has been severely asymmetric. And Chinese companies have been allowed to do things in Europe that European companies couldn't ever dream of doing in China, in terms of acquisitions and investments and ownership or IP. But now I think we have other issues that you just mentioned that have come to sort of make the picture a bit murkier. But those underlying issues still remain. And I think we should be very strict and very firm in making sure that the playing field gets more level as soon as possible.
Well, as we've discussed, the technological innovation or advancement in cyber powers like China is progressing at a rapid clip. There's decoupling and then there's containment. So when we have global common interests like harnessing the power of technology to combat things like climate change, is containment, which is an approach some Western countries are taking, the right one?
Well, from the point of view of the United States, they are worried about their number one position in the world, and they want to contain China as much as is necessary to ensure that the United States remains the number one superpower in the world. Europe is not a superpower as such, so we are not in that race, but we need to make sure that we remain competitive so that our corporate ecosystem, our business ecosystem continues to be competitive. We don't need to think about sort of strategic leadership for national security, which is the US point of view. And that should be an asset to us. We should have more freedom to operate, because our concerns are not the same as the concerns in the United States.
Let's use a specific example here. Obviously, the Internet of Things for years has been talked about in terms of the promise of interconnectivity. Now the hot new thing is Web 3.0 and so on and so forth. When it comes to something like 5G networks, is it really in the interest to restrict or to ban companies like Huawei, given their technology is quite ahead of the competition in certain aspects of the network?
I would disagree with that they are ahead. They are ahead in some things. Nokia is ahead in some other things, and Ericsson is ahead in some things as well. So it's not a fact that Huawei would be leading in all the important segments, not nearly all. But the fact remains that 5G is a critical technology. By the way, an example of how Europe has messed things up, whereas China and the United States have a national frequency strategy. In Europe, all countries are doing their own things, and it means that from the point of view of, let's say, Nokia, they need to engineer different equipment for different countries. And we will not have a unified spectrum strategy in Europe, which slows things down for many entrepreneurs that want to innovate in that field. Whereas in China and the United States, it's simple, and that removes friction. It makes things faster. So that's an example of an area where European entrepreneurs are behind because of the European system.
That's a governance and a policy issue in terms of the piecemeal approach. So in terms of looking forward to the future, and again, Europe's place in that, what do you think the focus should be when it comes to what some people dub megatrends? I mentioned, for example, the Internet of Things. Other people have talked around, obviously there's a lot of discussion around payment systems and wallets. There's a lot of discussion around super apps. What do you think is a good focus for Europe going forward?
Well, from the European point of view, the business-to-consumer game has been lost. Europe has about 3% of the market value of the B2C companies. 3%. So I don't think we will catch up.
That's a bit grim.
It is, but B2B is still wide open.
Okay.
How corporations digitalize themselves, their manufacturing. It's a big opportunity for Europe that is still a manufacturing powerhouse. So there's lots that European IT entrepreneurs can do in that segment. And then maybe there's another segment that is not discussed much, which is government to citizen. So how do governments work in the digital future? And what kind of systems could be put into place? Are we all going to have a citizen app which will help us to serve or provide the government-related services, public services to us from the birth of a child to the death of a parent and everything in between? And who will be doing those apps? And what kind of additional services can be generated on top of that platform? That's maybe an opportunity for Europe.
That's quite interesting when you say government to citizen, because the coronavirus pandemic, which is still ongoing, has really accelerated and compressed timeframes in terms of trends. And so you saw a lot of national governments introduce healthcare apps, COVID tracking apps. I'm from Singapore, again, they have a very sophisticated government to citizen apps, for example. So you think that this can expand beyond just healthcare to other services, essential services, and
I think we should, because now we are in a siloed app world thinking about government to citizen. Most agencies, different branches of government, they have their own apps. And then we need to have like 20 different apps. And it makes our life unnecessarily complicated.
It does require trust in government, though.
It does, but governments need to generate that trust to survive.
When you see the rise of more authoritarianism or certain hardline regimes, that could potentially be difficult. But in terms of what you are also bullish on, how about, again, the offline to online? You said that there's only 3% when it's B2C. But again, with the pandemic, we saw this acceleration take place. Could they not make up a bit more of that gap? Could we not see more strides? We've saw quite a few interesting startups, for example, in the other room, in which we see a lot of entrepreneurs trying to do B2C.
Yeah, I have either founded or been funding 5 unicorns so far, and many of those have been exited to the US, even though I would have preferred to have them remain European independent companies, do an IPO as an exit strategy. But the fact is that the valuations in the United States, I think that's probably a signal for us.
We're just getting onto the venture capital aspect. So again, You've got over 30 active investments, and you mentioned the unicorns. So you're mentioning, I think we can finish this point. But yes, in terms of the startups that you're looking at, you would prefer for them to, again, raise money, be listed in Europe, but they've chosen America.
Yeah, or they have been forced to choose the US, because US-based companies are typically more valuable. Why are they more valuable? Because they are more likely to succeed on a global scale. Why are they more likely to succeed? Because they have such a large home market that they can grow to critical size in their home market. European companies are cheaper because historically they have not been as successful. They have not become the global dominant platforms. So they are cheaper. And then due to the valuation differences, it's very easy for American players to acquire the cheaper European companies. And as the European companies are venture capital funded, of course the VCs expect to get the highest possible price. And therefore, we tend to lose the best European companies to the US.
And really, really quickly, venture capital funds obviously are very active in the space. Many have outperformed during the pandemic, but given the global economic scenario right now, is the party over?
No, I don't think the party is over. Actually, I think putting your money in the future winners is the best way to survive a possible long depression.
You used depression, not recession. That made
Yeah.
me a little worried.
Yeah.
Oh no.
But whatever comes, if you put your money in successful companies, in companies that create value and you know that they will grow, that's the best way to survive whatever comes, whether it's for a year or 3 years. I think that's the best investment advice that anybody can give.
Risto Siilasmaa, founder of F-Secure and chairman of WithSecure Corporations, thank you so much for your insights. A round of applause, please, for our speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you.